The rain had been on the glass for 3 hours when Iona found the false floor. She had not gone to the library looking for it. She had gone because sleep would not come, and because the trunks in her dressing room were already packed, and because she needed somewhere to sit that did not smell of departure. She had taken the single lamp from the corridor table, wrapped her dressing gown tighter against the November cold, and settled at Cyrus's desk with the intention of reading nothing more dangerous than his agricultural correspondence. She had been reaching for the bottom drawer when she noticed it. The hollow sound, faint as a misplaced heartbeat, when her knee brushed the oak panel beneath. She had knelt. She had pressed. She had lifted a thin sheet of wood no thicker than a volume of verse, and the lamp in her hand had illuminated what lay beneath it. And for a long moment, Iona Marchetti-Vance did not breathe at all. 3 letters in her father's handwriting. The seals broken. She knew those seals. She had pressed them herself, at 15, at her father's direction, using the ring he kept on his right hand and the dark red wax he ordered from a particular shop in Florence. She had watched those letters burn in Vienna in 1822, standing beside her mother in the embassy garden on the morning of the funeral, the fire eating the paper so thoroughly that nothing remained but a smear of ash across the stone. She was 19 years old, and her mother had said, "Do not ask," and she had not asked. And here the letters were, in the false floor of her husband's desk, 14 years later, the paper perfectly intact. She laid them on the desk in the order of their dates. Then she lifted the 4th document, not her father's hand, but Cyrus's, precise and economical as everything he did. And she read the 7 names written there, each with a date beside it, each date a record of something she could not yet name. The most recent entry was Tuesday. Today was Tuesday. The clock on the mantelpiece read 3 in the morning. She was still kneeling, the false floor panel in her hands, the 4 documents spread across the desk in the lamplight, when the library door opened behind her. Cyrus stood in his traveling coat, hat still on, a case in one hand. He had been due back from London on Thursday. He looked at his wife on the floor beside his desk, and at the open drawer, and at the lifted panel, and at the 4 documents arranged with the particular precision that meant she had already read every one of them. He set the case down. He removed his hat. He said, in a voice that was very quiet and entirely steady, "I have been pretending since our wedding day." Iona did not rise. She set the panel down with care, aligning its edge with the desk leg. She looked at the documents rather than at him. "I have been packing since Tuesday," she said. The rain continued on the glass. Neither of them moved. There is a particular quality to a marriage that has been arranged on terms neither party fully understands. It does not feel like deception from the inside. It feels rather like furniture, like rooms organized around a purpose that was decided before you arrived, so that every chair and table seems sensible on its own. But the overall arrangement never quite invites you to sit down. On the morning of their wedding in March of 1826, Iona had stood in the receiving line at Whitley Park and felt the weight of 300 people's attention as a physical thing, like weather. She had been 29 years old, recently returned from 7 years of scholarly work in Vienna and Rome, and she had understood the match with the Earl of Whitley in the way she understood most things, as a structure with internal logic, if you located the correct framework. Her father had spoken well of Cyrus Vance. Her mother had said it was time. Iona had agreed, because disagreement had seemed, at 29, like a luxury she had already spent. She remembered, from that morning, his hand at the small of her back as he guided her through the receiving line. A brief, efficient pressure, steering her away from Lord Alderton before Alderton could begin his interminable opinions about the Italian question. It had not been affectionate, precisely. It had been protective. She had registered it and thought, perhaps this will be enough. She had not thought to ask what it was protecting her from. 4 years later, kneeling beside the false floor, she understood that the hand had always been facing outward. The other memory she carried from that season was older. Her father's funeral in Vienna, December of 1822. She had been 19, and the cold had been the particular dry cold of the Austrian winter. The kind that does not feel like weather, but like architecture. As though the air itself had been constructed to keep you at a distance from everything you reached for. Her mother had stood very straight throughout the service. Afterward, in the embassy garden, she had burned the letters, and she had said to Iona, in Italian, in a voice that permitted no argument, "Do not ask who was on the road that night. Do not ask why the carriage went that way. Your father is gone, and asking questions will not bring him back, and it will put us in danger, and I am asking you, as the only thing I will ever ask you, to let it rest." Iona had let it rest. She had been 19, and her mother was the only person left. And asking had felt, in that moment, like stepping off a ledge whose depth she could not see. She had not asked. She had spent 14 years translating other people's documents under a name that was not hers. And she had married a man who put his hand at her back in receiving lines. And she had let it rest. On Monday night, the night before Tuesday, she had been reaching for a pen she had dropped and heard the hollow sound and lifted the panel and found the letters and understood that the ledge had been there all along. She had simply been standing on the wrong side of it. She had read the documents twice. She had replaced the panel. She had gone upstairs, opened the trunks that lived in the back of her dressing room, and begun to pack in complete silence. Her maid asleep down the hall. The house quiet around her. By Tuesday morning, the trunks were ready. She had gone about the day, her translations, her correspondence, her dinner alone in the small dining room, and she had told no one. And she had waited. She had not expected him 2 days early. She had not expected to be found kneeling on the library floor with his secrets arranged before her like evidence at an inquest. But she had been a diplomat's daughter and a cryptographer's apprentice, and she knew that the moment a document was found, the conversation it contained became inevitable. Now the rain was still on the glass. The lamp was burning low. Cyrus had not moved from the doorway, and Iona had not moved from the floor. And the false floor lay open between them like a question that had been waiting 14 years for someone to ask it aloud. She did not sleep. When dawn came gray and wet through the windows of her writing room, Iona was already at her desk, the 4 documents arranged before her in the order she had determined in the small hours. Not by date, but by the order in which she meant to address them. The 3 letters first, then the list of names. Cyrus appeared in the doorway at 7. He had not slept either. He had changed his coat, which was the only concession he made to the passage of the night. And he carried nothing in his hands, which meant he had decided to answer without the usual buffer of documents between them. She noticed this. She filed it. "Sit down," she said. He sat in the chair across the desk, the one she kept for her maid when they worked together on correspondence. He looked at the 4 documents and then at her. "I have 3 questions," Iona said. "I would prefer you answer them in order." "Ask them," Cyrus said. "Did you know my father before our marriage?" A pause of perhaps 2 seconds. He answered quietly, "Yes." "Did you know how he died?" Another pause, this one longer. His voice was careful. "Yes," She had expected both answers. She had spent the night preparing for them. She still had to set her pen down carefully on the desk rather than trust her grip on it. "Were you told to marry me?" Cyrus looked at her for a long moment. His expression did not change in any way she could name, but something behind it shifted. A rearrangement, like a man deciding which door to open. "I will answer that question," he said, "when you have decided whether you want the truth or whether you want to leave." "I'm not being evasive. I mean that practically. If you want to leave, I will arrange it safely, and you will be gone before noon. If you want the truth, you cannot have it before noon, because what I have to tell you will require you to stay in this house, and I will not keep you here against your will." Iona looked at him across the desk. "You're telling me the truth is dangerous." "I'm telling you the truth requires a decision first. Not about me. About what you want your life to look like after today." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the park was very still. She looked at the 3 letters in her father's handwriting. The letters she had watched burn, the letters that had not burned. And she understood something that rearranged her entirely, as a sentence rearranges when you locate the correct grammatical subject. The marriage she had experienced as a slow closing of a door had been, in some form she did not yet fully understand, the reason she was alive to be furious about it. She did not say this. She said, "I will hear the rest when I am ready, not before." She rose from the desk. "I am moving to the Dower wing this morning. I will take my maid and my work. You will send for me when there is something concrete to show me, and not before." Cyrus rose as well. "Iona, I am not leaving Whitley Park," she said, and her voice carried the particular precision of a woman who has chosen every word and weighed it. "I am moving to the Dower wing because I require a room in which I can think without also managing what is on your face. When I am ready to hear the third answer, I will come to you." She left the writing room. By mid-morning, her maid had transferred her translation ledgers and her pseudonym correspondence to the Dower wing, a quarter-mile across the park, and Iona did not cross back that day. 3 weeks passed in the strangest arrangement Whitley Park had ever housed. Iona worked her Cambridge translations in the Dower wing by daylight. A commission for a series of Venetian diplomatic dispatches from the previous century, submitted under the name Edmund Vere, which was what she had been calling herself in print for 4 years. At night she read her father's 3 letters with a cipher key she had borrowed from a contact at Cambridge on the pretext of scholarly research. A contact who had known her father and asked no questions, which was the only kind of contact worth having. The letters were layered. Her father had used a notation system that required 3 things to unlock: knowledge of spoken Italian as distinct from written Italian, familiarity with a particular set of historical references from the Venetian Republic, and an understanding of the man's private shorthand that he had developed over 30 years and taught to no one but his daughter. Iona had spent her childhood learning it the way other children learned piano, through repetition and correction and the occasional sharp word when she missed a nuance. She had not used it in 14 years. It came back to her the way languages always came back. Slowly at first, then suddenly all at once, like a room filling with light. What the letters contained, she did not yet share with anyone. Cyrus remained at the main house. He intercepted 2 further approaches to the estate's boundaries during those 3 weeks. Once a man asking the groundskeeper about positions, once a letter addressed to Iona at Whitley Park from a name she would not have recognized, which Cyrus held back without telling her. She did not know about either. She was building her understanding from the documents, and he was building a perimeter around her, and neither of them had yet acknowledged that they were working toward the same point from opposite directions. They met for dinner 3 nights a week in the main house's formal dining room, a servant always present. The conversations were civil and precise. Iona would make an observation about the political weather, the instability in Paris, the pressure on the Foreign Office, the particular nervousness of the diplomatic correspondence she translated for Cambridge. And Cyrus would respond not with opinions, but with documents, sliding papers across the table with the date marked and a single phrase underlined. It was, she reflected one evening, the most efficient form of conversation she had ever conducted. It was also, she thought on the walk back across the park, the most careful. He was telling her things without telling her things, and she was receiving them, and neither of them was quite ready to close the remaining distance. The night after the third dinner, past midnight, she heard a sound in the corridor outside her locked bedroom door. Not a knock, not footsteps. A sound she could not immediately categorize, a careful settling, like weight distributed deliberately onto old floorboards. She lay still for a moment. Then she rose, took the lamp from the bedside table, and opened the door. A chair had been set across the corridor, facing her door directly. Cyrus sat in it, fully dressed, a pistol resting on his knee, his head against the wall, and his eyes closed. He was asleep. He had positioned the chair so that nothing could reach her door without first passing him. Iona stood in the doorway for a long moment, the lamp in her hand. She looked at the pistol on his knee, and the careful angle of the chair, and the slight tension that remained in his jaw, even in sleep. The particular vigilance of a man who did not fully trust unconsciousness. Then she stepped back into her room. She closed the door. She did not lock it. The Greenwich safe house was a tall, narrow building 3 streets from the river, smelling of tallow and old paper, with windows that looked onto a courtyard where pigeons objected to everything. Iona arrived there 6 weeks after the night of the false floor, in a carriage with Cyrus and a sealed box between them on the seat containing the 4 documents. And she found the place already prepared, a table cleared, lamps trimmed, a fire in the grate, and no one else in the building. They worked through the letters together for the first time. Iona had not intended to share the decipherment process. She had intended to present Cyrus with conclusions, as one presents a translation to the person who commissioned it, finished, organized, stripped of the working notes. But the third letter contained a passage that required spoken Italian to unlock. A particular Venetian idiom her father had used to mean one thing in print and another in conversation. And she found herself saying it aloud to hear the cadence before she wrote it down. And Cyrus said, from across the table, "That phrase means something different in the Venetian dialect." She looked up. "You speak Venetian Italian?" "I spent 18 months in the region in 1809, he said. "Your father and I were working the same corridor." She absorbed this. Then she picked up her pen and said, "Then you can help me with the notation," and began explaining her father's layered cipher system, the way it worked, the references it required, the particular historical shorthand that could not be guessed but had to be learned from the man himself or from someone he had taught. She watched Cyrus follow it with the focused stillness of a man who had spent his life learning to read systems, and she found that the explanation came naturally, as though she had been waiting for someone capable of receiving it. He worked well. He was careful, and he did not guess when he was uncertain, which was the first requirement of good cipher work. He asked precise questions. He made one error in transcription, writing a phrase in a slightly anglicized form that shifted the meaning by a degree that mattered. Iona reached across the table. She placed her hand over his on the page, her fingers closing gently over his to redirect the pen. and guided him back to the correct notation. Neither of them withdrew. The phrase she was correcting read, in plain English, when she had finished, "She must not be told." She lifted her hand. She did not comment on the phrase. She moved to the next line, her pen moving steadily across the paper, and he did not apologize. And they continued working until the lamp ran low, and the courtyard outside had gone entirely dark. By the end of that session, she had identified 5 of the 7 names on his list. She understood what the letters had been pointing toward. She understood why her father had written them in cipher. She understood, with a clarity that arrived not as revelation, but as the slow settling of a weight she had been carrying without knowing its shape. What had happened in Vienna in 1822, and why? She did not yet say aloud the name she suspected for the 7th entry. She closed her notes. She said, "We should sleep." And they did, in separate rooms on opposite ends of the narrow house. And she lay awake for an hour, listening to the river and thinking about a man she had been told to stop asking questions about, and whether she was still the woman who had agreed to stop asking. At 2 in the morning, 6 weeks after the night of the false floor, Iona was woken by a sound from the floor below. She had been back at Whitley Park for 3 days, returned from Greenwich with 4 pages of deciphered notes and 2 names she had not yet verified. The sound was not wind. It was not the house settling. It was the particular sound of a door being tested at its frame, cautious, professional, the sound of someone who knew how to open things quietly and was applying that knowledge to the orangery door. She was out of bed before she had consciously decided to move. She crossed to Cyrus's room. The door between the dressing rooms had been left unlocked since the night of the corridor chair, and she took the pistol from his bedside table. She knew the mechanism because her father had taught her at 15 in the garden of the Vienna embassy, insisting that a woman who could read a cipher ought also to be able to load a weapon, and that these 2 skills were not as different as they appeared. She checked the load. She went to the main staircase. Below her, in the orangery corridor, she could see Cyrus. He had been awake, she realized, had perhaps never slept, moving toward the orangery stairs with a controlled efficiency she had not seen before. He intercepted the man on the stairs, and what followed was brief and almost silent. And then the figure was on the floor of the corridor and Cyrus was straightening. He turned. He saw his wife standing on the landing above him, in her nightgown, with his pistol raised and steady in both hands, aimed at a point she had already adjusted for the distance. What crossed his face was not surprise. It was not alarm. It was something that had been held back for a very long time. Something that had been waiting, with considerable patience, for permission to exist. He came up the stairs in 3 strides, and he took her face in both hands, not to kiss her, only to hold it. His palms warm against her jaw, and his forehead pressing against hers, and both of them were trembling in a way that had nothing to do with cold. They stayed that way. The house was silent around them. The pistol was still in her hand, lowered now, and his hands were still on her face, and the orangery below was still and dark. And neither of them moved until dawn came through the library windows, and the light was full enough to see by. By the time the light had fully arrived, they were in a carriage together, the sealed box of documents between them on the seat, headed for Greenwich. 2 weeks at the Greenwich safe house produced the decipherment that Iona had known, in some deep grammatical part of herself, was coming. The 6th name on Cyrus's list was dead, had died in 1819, she established, cross-referencing the dates in her father's notation against a Foreign Office register that Cyrus produced from the box without comment. That left the 7th. She worked the final passage on a Thursday morning, the fire burning steadily, Cyrus across the table with his own notes. The courtyard outside, bright with cold November sun. The notation was dense. Her father had layered 3 reference systems over each other in this section, which meant he had known it was the most dangerous passage and had protected it accordingly. She worked through the outer layer, then the second, then the innermost. And she wrote the name in plain English on the paper in front of her and set her pen down. Lord Pelham, Cyrus's former superior in the service. The man who had recommended Cyrus marry Iona Marchetti-Vance in the spring of 1826. She slid the paper across the table without speaking. Cyrus read it. He set it back down on the table, precisely aligned with its edge, in the careful way he set things down when his hands needed something to do. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, looking at the courtyard where the pigeons were conducting their usual grievances. He stood there for a long time. Then he said, to the window, "I did not choose you in the way I believed I was choosing." Iona did not speak. "I believed I was honoring a friend's memory," Cyrus said. "I believed I was acting freely. I have been going back through 4 years of my own decisions, and I can see now exactly where I was steered and how. And I did not see it while it was happening, which means I was not the architect of anything. I was the mechanism." He paused. "I have spent 4 years standing between you and a danger I only partially understood. And the man who put me there was the same man who created the danger in the first place, and he used my belief in my own judgment to do it." He did not raise his voice. He became very still and very plain, in the way that certain men become plain when the performance they have been maintaining finally costs more than they have left to spend. Iona did not move to offer comfort, because she understood that what he needed in this moment was not comfort, but the dignity of someone who did not look away from what he had said. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her and began writing out a summary of the cipher evidence. Organized by date, cross-referenced against the names, structured as a formal document that a panel could follow without knowing the notation system. It was the only thing she knew how to offer him. It was also, she thought, the most useful. The fire in the kitchen started 2 hours later. She smelled it first, not smoke, but the particular sharpness of something burning that was not supposed to burn. A chemical edge to it that meant the source was deliberate. She was on her feet before Cyrus reached the door. They went through the garden, the document box under his arm, her notes in her hand. And they did not stop until they were 3 streets away, and the safe house was behind them, with smoke beginning to show at the kitchen window. The cell knew where they were. They had run out of time for anything that was not a decision. The Foreign Office moved them to a 3rd location, a private house in Kensington, anonymous behind its identical neighbors, and convened a sealed tribunal within the week. Iona was asked, in a private room with 2 men she did not know and one she recognized as the Foreign Secretary's senior clerk, whether she would testify under her own name. She was the only person alive with the linguistic certainty to make the identification stand before a panel. Her father's notation system could not be explained by anyone who had not learned it from him directly. Without her testimony, the cipher documents were suggestive. With it, they were conclusive. She did not answer that day. The following morning, she sat on the low garden wall at the Kensington house. The sun thin and white in the early winter sky, her coat buttoned to the throat. The garden was frost-killed and quiet. She had been sitting there for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard the door, and Cyrus appeared with 2 cups of tea, which he had clearly made himself, judging by the slightly uncertain way he was managing them. He set one on the wall beside her. He held the other. "I am going to name him," Iona said. She was looking at the dead garden. "Under my own name. I am finished with Edmund Vere." She paused. I am finished with all of it. The pseudonym, the manuscripts, the 4 years of work I have published as someone else because I was told it was safer or more appropriate or more likely to be taken seriously. I am finished hiding. Cyrus set his cup down on the wall. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he moved off the wall entirely and knelt on the gravel in front of her. Not theatrically, not with any performance in it, simply bringing himself level with her face, as a man kneels when he wants to be seen clearly and wants to see clearly in return. I have loved you since the 3rd week of our marriage, he said. I have loved you since the evening you told me, at dinner, that my translation of a particular Cicero passage was technically correct and entirely wrong, and then explained why for 40 minutes without notes. Not telling you has been the longest sustained effort of my life. Iona looked at him on the gravel in front of her. This careful, evasive, document-producing man, who had spent 4 years standing between her and something she had not known was there, who had learned that he himself was the instrument and had set it down and said so plainly, who was kneeling on frost-cold gravel and telling her the truth with no buffer between them. She kissed him. Once and slowly, the way someone closes a book they have been meaning to finish for 4 years and have finally reached the last page of. His hand came up to her jaw, and the garden was very quiet, and the winter sun was on both of them. That evening, Cyrus submitted his written resignation from all consultative ties to the service that had used him. He did not discuss it with her first. He showed her the letter afterward, and she read it, and she said, her voice steady and certain, "Good." And that was the whole of it. The Foreign Office anteroom was paneled in dark oak, lit by windows that faced north and therefore admitted light without warmth. It held, on the morning of the tribunal, 7 men, 5 panel members, the Foreign Secretary's senior clerk, and Lord Pelham, who had been summoned as a senior officer to advise the proceedings and had been told only that the matter concerned a cipher document of French origin. He had not been told who the witness was. The door opened, and Iona walked in. She was dressed plainly in dark green wool, her hair arranged without ornament. She carried a leather document case. She did not look at the panel first. She looked at Pelham. He saw her. He understood immediately. She watched the understanding arrive in his face, watched the calculation that followed it, watched him decide in the space of 3 seconds how to manage what was about to happen. He was a man who had spent 30 years managing things, and he was very good at it. And she had spent the carriage ride from Kensington preparing for exactly this. She set the document case on the table before the panel and opened it. She laid the 3 letters in her father's hand on the table in sequence, each one followed by her transcription in plain English. Then she laid the cipher summary she had written in Greenwich, dated, organized, cross-referenced. Then the list of 7 names in Cyrus's hand, with the dates. "My name is Iona Marchetti-Vance," she said to the panel, in a voice that carried the translator's precision she had been refining since she was 12 years old. "My father was Emilio Marchetti, diplomatic cryptographer, who died in Vienna in December of 1822 in what was recorded as a carriage accident. I'm going to tell you what actually happened and who arranged it. And I am going to demonstrate, from these documents, in my father's own notation, that Lord Pelham, currently seated to your left as an advisor to this panel, arranged my father's death to protect his own operational relationship with a French intelligence cell, maintained that relationship for 15 years, and arranged my marriage to Cyrus Vance as a containment measure intended to ensure I would not resume my father's cipher work." The room was absolutely silent. "He used my husband as an instrument," Iona continued, setting her hands flat on the table. Without my husband's knowledge, he allowed the men who killed my father to operate in London for 15 years. He did this to protect his own position. I can demonstrate each of these statements from the documents before you, and I will do so now, in sequence, beginning with the first letter. Pelham said, in the measured tone of a man who has faced difficult rooms before, "Gentlemen, I must point out that what you are hearing is the testimony of a grieving daughter who has had 14 years to construct a narrative around her father's death. Lady Vance has no formal standing before this panel, no training in intelligence analysis, and she has the only qualification that matters," said a voice from the back of the room. Cyrus had not been told whom she would name. He had been brought in as a corroborating witness to the cipher documents generally, not to the specific identification. He rose from his chair at the back wall, and his expression was the one Iona had seen in the Greenwich safe house when he set the paper down, very still, very plain, a man who has finished performing. "I have 4 years of intercept records," Cyrus said, coming to the table and placing his own document folder beside Iona's. "Every approach to Whitley Park, every name that appears in those documents." He opened the folder to the first page and set it before the panel. "I identified 6 of the 7 names through my own surveillance. Lady Vance identified the 7th through her father's cipher, which is the only means by which that identification could have been made. The 7th name is Lord Pelham. I am confirming that identification from my own 4 years of operational record." He paused. "I was placed in this marriage by Lord Pelham's recommendation. I was told it was to honor a colleague's memory. I have since established that I was placed as a surveillance asset to monitor whether Lady Vance would resume her father's work, and that the recommendation was made to Lord Pelham by the French cell's London handler. Who is Lord Pelham?" Pelham rose from his chair. "This is an extraordinary—" "Sit down, my lord," said the panel's senior member, in the tone of a man who has heard enough extraordinary things to last several lifetimes. Pelham sat. Iona worked through the cipher documents for the next 2 hours. She explained her father's notation system, demonstrated it on passages the panel could verify against independent diplomatic records, and walked them through the chain of evidence from the first letter to the last name on the list. She answered every question directly, without notes, without hesitation, in the translator's voice that gave every word its full and unambiguous weight. When Pelham's counsel attempted twice more to characterize her analysis as amateur, she corrected the technical errors in his characterization with a courtesy that was, in its precision, more devastating than argument. Cyrus confirmed each operational detail as she reached it. They had not coordinated their testimony. They did not need to. They had been reading the same documents from opposite ends for 6 weeks, and they had arrived at the same place. As 2 people working the same cipher from different directions will always arrive at the same plaintext. Lord Pelham was taken into custody before he left the room. He said nothing further. He walked out between 2 men in the Foreign Office's employ, and the door closed behind him. And Iona stood at the table with her documents before her, and the panel still seated and the room very quiet. And she did not feel triumphant, exactly. She felt the particular sensation of a question that has been unanswered for 14 years, finally receiving its answer. Not relief, but the end of a particular kind of tension, the way a sustained musical note finally resolves. She looked across the table at Cyrus. He looked back at her. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The cell was rolled up over the following month through the names she had identified. The matter remained classified. Society never knew what had nearly destroyed them or what had saved them. The world continued in its ordinary arrangements, and Whitley Park sat in its park as it always had, and no one who drove past it would have known that anything had changed. 6 weeks after the tribunal, the library at Whitley Park was transformed. The shutters were thrown open for the first time in the years Iona had lived there. She had always found the shuttered quality of the room oppressive, but had not known, until now, that there was something specific it had been shuttering against. The morning light came in cold and clean across 2 desks that sat side by side where one had been before. The false floor desk was gone entirely, replaced by something new, something without a hidden chamber, something that was simply a desk. Late one afternoon, Cyrus closed a folio. Iona set down her pen. He reached across and extinguished the lamp, and the library went warm and dim in the last of the autumn light. And she heard him cross the room, and the door opened and closed, and she followed, and the library was quiet behind them. The next morning, sunlight came through the library windows at an angle that reached all the way to the back wall. On Iona's desk, a fresh sheet of paper held the first line of a monograph she had been composing in her head since Greenwich. The first scholarly work she had ever set down in her own name. An analysis of her father's cipher system, its historical antecedents, its linguistic architecture, its application to diplomatic correspondence of the period. The line read, "The notation system developed by Iona Marchetti between 1795 and 1822 represents the most sophisticated private cipher produced by any individual working outside a formal intelligence apparatus in the 19th century." At the bottom of the page, in her own hand, Iona Vance, Whitley Park. On Cyrus's desk, in the place where the false floor used to be, in the exact place as though it had always been meant to sit there, stood a small frame, not large, the kind that holds a single page. Inside it, a fragment of paper in her father's handwriting, the ink faded to brown at the edges, a piece of a letter she had never seen before. Cyrus had found it in a second concealment she had not known about. A letter her father had written and never sent. A letter that had traveled from Vienna to London to the false floor and now to the light. The decoded line, written in plain Italian and translated in Cyrus's hand at the bottom of the frame, read, "She will see further than any of us. Pray we deserve her when she does." Iona stood at her desk and read it. Then she sat down, picked up her pen, and went back to work.